Right, so before I let you all have some drinks and snacks and conversations, hopefully lots of, I'd like to give a little recap of 2018 because I think it's important to look back as well. And I don't think we do that often enough. And I think a lot of the mistakes that we make are repeats of what has been going wrong beforehand because we are not taking a breather to look at what we have accomplished, what we have done well, what we haven't done so well. And by we, I mean the web development community at large or the web community at large. So this is also reflected in the fact that a lot of people suffer from hashtag FOMO, so the fear of missing out. And I think it should be a joy of missing out because we have only so much time on this earth. So we might use the time to make conscious decisions on what we want to use it for. So I'd like to look back on what we did or what happened this year in the world of web development and the web platform and the web ecosystem. And I'd like to start with how the year started. Does anyone remember if it was a good start for the web platform or it was a not so good start for the web platform or computing in total? If that gives you a hint. It wasn't the bugs, yes. And not only one, it is two instead. We actually had, good morning, okay. Here we go. What? No, that's not right. Yeah, there we go. We had two fantastic bugs. And you can tell that these have been serious security issues because they have fantastic logos, right? I mean, we get like this one that's a little like stealing from Heartbleed. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But when this way bad boy came around, I'm like, oh God, okay, this is bad. So the very fundamentals of computing, how we did it for the last 20-something years, was multiprocessing, basically running multiple programs at the same time. I mean, here you see like my operating system's probably running the clock in the background, probably like downloading something because that's always happening, updating the macOS operating system probably, and showing some slides. So like there's a bunch of stuff going on. It does connect to my clicker, so we have some Bluetooth here. So like a bunch of stuff happens at the same time. What you don't want to happen is that some program running aside or along of another program, killing it or breaking it or strangling it to death like the microservices on serverless. What you want instead is you want to have some boundaries between these programs, not only because they could kill each other, they could also steal data. And this got worse or more important when we started doing cloud stuff, right? My software, my web service might run next to this web service of my competitor or a hacker. I have to rely on the fact that they are not able to reach into my memory and steal the credentials and stuff, for instance. And that was assumed to be the case. Processor developers, be it AMD, ARM, or Intel, or any of the others, have made sure that that couldn't happen. However, there was a bunch of stuff, a bunch of performance optimizations that we have been seeing in the last couple of years, fostered by Moore's Law, where the Intel CEO famously said, like, oh yeah, we're doubling the speed every, I think, 18 months. Eventually, that's not possible due to physics. So they did a bunch of clever tricks. And as a developer, you probably know if you do clever stuff, it comes back biting you. And this is exactly what happened here. So there is a possibility built into processors these days where one program could steal data from another program. Now, that isn't necessarily terribly bad because you don't install that many programs. In fact, there's statistics that say on mobile, the average user installs 0 apps per month on average. So how bad can it be? Well, it turns out that we have a bunch of stuff on the web platform that is amazing and great for performance, such as these shared array buffers. Shared array buffers allow you to basically have multiple threads or a web worker and your website to interact with the same amount of memory. The problem is that you can use the timing of these accesses, if you read and write from them, to deduct what memory of another program might contain. So this means that by visiting a website, someone could steal pretty much anything that is in any running or not running program on your computer. So if you have your email client open, that's pretty bad because someone could literally read your emails by just you visiting a website. That's not great. So this caused a lot of ruckus and a lot of problems, and we're still seeing mitigations happening and rolling out. So unless we get new processors, we're not going to see this die out entirely. But luckily, there are mitigations in place that at least the web platform is safe from it for now. So that was a pretty bad start, I would say. But then a good thing happened. Mozilla turned 20. Who remembers downloading the first Firefox? Good stuff. So Mozilla, the foundation, is now 20 years old. Firefox is becoming faster and better. We've seen updates like Quantum. We've seen Mozilla experimenting with Rust and the new rendering engine. If you haven't heard of Servo, I highly recommend looking into Servo from Mozilla. It's a lovely community, and it's a great project that tries to explore what browser rendering engines could look like. And a bunch of the good stuff in Mozilla Firefox that has landed now is coming from the Servo project. So that was a good thing, and we celebrated Mozilla's 20th birthday this year. Then, freaking finally, Edge and Safari added support for service workers. So if you don't know what this is, basically a website used to only work if you're online, right? It makes sense. We have to go to the network every time, and then we have to fetch data. But with service workers, we now have basically a programmable, in JavaScript, a programmable proxy in the browser that we can use to make our website offline capable. But not only that, that's the obvious thing. We also have things like background sync. So if I write a web app that lets me send messages, and I hit send, but I'm offline at the time because I'm on the tube or something, then I could basically show in the UI yeah, we are sending this, but don't worry, you can carry on and write more messages or do something completely different. And then whenever the web connection is reestablished, even if we close the browser, the operating system on our phone will allow the browser to come back on without us seeing that and actually sending that message. So we have background sync now. We have push notifications. Some hate it, some love it. I have them disabled, to be honest, but that's still pretty good. And you can also basically make your websites or web apps faster if you are okay with the data being a little outdated and only refreshing the next time that page is refreshed. You can basically store stuff in the cache programmatically, so you get to call what goes in the cache and what doesn't. And then fetch that right away from the cache and then do the network request as long as it takes. And when that comes back over a slow network connection, like when you're on mobile internet in Germany, for instance, then I hate that network so much. And all of the providers are terrible, so don't get me started with yeah, well, but no, they're all terrible. So now finally even the people using Safari or Edge get that speed improvement and that additional offline functionality and offline capabilities and background sync and stuff like that. So that's pretty fantastic. Not necessarily fantastic, but I think an important move is when web components were originally introduced in Chrome, they were an experiment. And they started with the template tag, the custom elements specification, the Shadow DOM specification, and the HTML imports. Now, HTML imports are dead because we have ES6 modules and we're exploring more different ways of doing module loading on the web. Shadow DOM has significantly changed, but is now in all browsers. It started out in Chrome, but it's now in all the other browsers as well. But that meant that we had two different versions of web components in Chrome since a few months ago. So we had the old one that was kind of experimental and weird, and then we had the clean one that also works in, some of it works in Edge, all of it works in Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. So this is actually not a bad thing. Basically, the bad bits and pieces of the experiment have been removed from Chrome, so we now have a more clean slate and a better platform in the sense of that. Then we had something interesting happen when WebAssembly was introduced and a bunch of people were exploring what it could do. One thing that came out of this is that Cloudflare, a content distribution network, so basically a service where you upload your assets to and then they distribute it to servers all across the world so that the download times would be, or the transmission times, the latency would be lower. You can now also run some JavaScript on their computers, basically. So if you have something that you need to do, like image optimization or, I don't know, A/B testing, you don't have to do A/B testing on the client anymore. You can use the Edge routers of a CDN to do that if you're using Cloudflare, for instance. So that's pretty interesting and pretty exciting news. Now you can not only ship your JavaScript to the browsers of your users, you can also ship it to part of your infrastructure that you weren't able to control beforehand. It is limited because it has to be secure, but this is really, really interesting. And this is a great news. I think this goes mostly unnoticed, but I think it's a great thing to happen. We got variable fonts, right? So we can have fonts that look like really funky and come in different variations. And that is actually surprisingly supported across browsers. So this is really a success story of the web platform. This was introduced, this was standardized and spec'd, and has now landed on all browsers. There might still be like browser bugs that make them slightly icky to work with sometimes, but hey, we've got this. And along with this, we also got the font-display property. Who here has seen it when you're like on a slow connection that the website text appears, disappears for a while, and then reappears? You've seen that, right? That's what happens when there's a web font and like the document is parsed and then eventually it's like, oh, we need this particular type of font. So then it like goes like, oh, I don't have it yet because it's still downloading. So I'm going to hide the text. What? No, the text was there. Why is it gone now? And then eventually as the web font downloads, it's like, oh, there it is. Nice. Oh. With font-display in CSS, you can now say, no, use this like as optional or use this as a fallback or whatever. So basically you can specify, no, just give them text and make it pretty once you can. So that's pretty phenomenal and works pretty much across browsers. There's still like the bits and pieces. Then we got the payment API, sort of. It's not a standard yet, and different platforms implement different providers. So for instance, on Apple, you have Apple Pay in Safari. On Android devices, I think on Chrome in general, you have Google Pay. I don't know what Edge implements yet at this point, and it's behind the flag on Firefox. But we get a nicer way of taking payments from users, and that can include Apple Pay or Google Pay or whatnot. And this is really, really nice because it makes the payment flows a lot easier. So if you are a conversion-based business on the web, your life just became easier, and it's going to get more easy basically by the month once we are having this properly standardized. Then we had Chrome's 10th birthday. So woo! It was Google's 20th birthday, if I remember correctly, and it's Chrome's 10th birthday. So since 10 years, Chrome has been around, which triggered an interesting thing to happen at Chrome Dev Summit. So at Chrome Dev Summit's opening ceremony, Jake, Archibald, Paul, Lewis, and Mariko, oh Jesus, what's her last name? I'm bad with names. Mariko, it's just Mariko, okay? Mariko is fantastic. You should look her up on Twitter if you don't know her yet. They baked a cake with all the web ingredients and then presented it to the audience in happiness and oh, Jake. Oh, why? But you know, Jake is a professional. He knows how to handle the situation. So he knows how to handle this cake. I mean, it's nearly like new, right? This is fine. This is okay. But they had to introduce people, so it's like, yeah. So that went some way, right? So I can't watch this. This is so sad. The cake. But come on, he's trying. I mean, give him that, right? Poor Jake. He had one job, that was to carry the cake, but you know how it is, the nerves. It happens. Then we got the release of Angular. I mean, it doesn't contain Angular IB yet, but hey, you know, the team is getting there, and I think this is pretty good to see like a major release happening in Angular as well. So like we keep iterating there as well as a web platform to bring new stuff to our frameworks. And speaking of frameworks, React introduced React hooks. So if you don't want to write like classes for every small component, you can avoid that now with React hooks. And that's pretty interesting. It inspired a bunch of other frameworks to look into how they're organizing their code and how they're like hooking things up. There's a new thing from, if you know Preact, then you know Jason Miller, who wrote it. It's a small framework that is heavily inspired by React. He decided to write what he calls HTM, which is like a templating solution that is more or less like React hooks. Limited in functionality, but pretty nice and really, really small. So highly recommend looking into that. The Polymer team, after introducing lit HTML last year in the Polymer Summit, I think in the end of the year, but I'm not sure when the Polymer Summit was. They are now running the release candidate for lit HTML at 1.0. That's like a templating solution for web components. So if you are writing web components and don't want to go for one of the other frameworks, definitely look into lit HTML. It's getting there. If you find any bugs, they are super happy to hear from you. And the team is moving forward really quickly. So I highly recommend looking into all these different frameworks and what they are doing differently these days. Then there was an announcement that if you wonder what these PWA things are about and haven't actually like used service workers that much, who here knows like Flexbox Froggy or one of the other games that teach you like grid and Flexbox and stuff? It's similar to that. It is from the same guy that I think made Flexbox Froggies. I'm not so sure about that one, but basically, Service Workies is a game that teaches you how to program progressive web apps. And you learn about service workers, and you learn about the app manifest and all that stuff. So it's a really nice and gentle introduction into the topic, and it's really fun to play it. So I highly recommend checking it out as well. Another not so great thing that happened is the event stream incident. Who here knows what that is? What I'm talking about? Yeah, it's painful. So basically what happened is that there is a prolific problem in the open source community. A lot of open source is unsponsored, but still relied upon by many, many people. How many employees do you think does NPM have? 100? 500? 50? I think it's a really small team. I think it's like 10, 20-ish people. It's not that many people. It's a really, really small and lovely company, and they do their best. But there was something happening in the ecosystem that was a tricky one, and this is not the issue of the author or the people claiming this to be an issue. The problem is systemic in open source. How do we sustain open source? We have a lot of infrastructure bits and pieces that are not like React or Angular or Polymer or Ember, where there's like larger companies behind them backing them, right? There's a bunch of smaller projects that we are using every day that are probably run by very few people, either in their own time or as a side project or like as a thing where they get some Patreon every now and then, like $5. Great, with $5 per month on Patreon, you can't really pay rent, especially not in Zurich. But basically what happened here is there was an author that published a small module because they needed it, and they're like, yeah, you know, this is good, and I need it right now, so someone else might need it as well. And that's called Event Stream. I actually don't know what it does. I keep forgetting that, but it does a thing. And it's a small module that a lot of people are using, if you know it or not, right? If you're looking through your node_modules folders, you might find this module. And eventually he has a job, and he has no use for this module, so he like lets it linger, and he asks people like, so anyone here, I mean, I have so many people downloading it every week, and I have so many projects relying on this, but I don't need it anymore, I don't use it anymore, I don't have the time to work on it, so does anyone want to take it over? Guess how many people came forward and volunteered their time to make this project go forward? None. Well, one eventually did. Eventually, like no one came forward. And after a few months, someone said like, hey, hi, thank you very much for this project. I think it's fantastic and I use it, and I would like to take it over and maintain it. And what would you do at this point? You're like, yeah, sure, thank you very much. That's great. And you don't have the time and the capacity to work on the project. So you don't have the time or capacity to like vet this person, right? I can't like have them send their photo ID to me and then go like, oh, okay, that looks reasonable. Do you have some references that I can call and like do an interview process or something with them? That's not what's gonna happen. You're like, yes, someone likes this and takes this over. That's fantastic. Well, this person added some malware code to the module. So everyone, it wasn't clear what this thing does, but apparently what it does, everyone who installed it and happened to have some like bitcoins or something on their device might have had them stolen. Whoops. Now you can say like, yeah, that's bad on the author, they shouldn't have done this and blah, but let's be honest. You decide what you put in your package JSON. How often have you read the code of the modules that you're including and the code of the modules they're including? So I haven't done that. So this is risky, and it's okay. It's a risk that we have to, take sometimes, and it's a risk that we have to calculate for. But it's a risk that we have to be aware of, and we have to be willingly taking, and that means that we have to give back to open source. It's the only way to do this, be it by sponsoring it, or be it by like going to our bosses and say like, hey, do we have some money to sponsor this project? And if they're like, why the fuck would we do that? And you're like, because we are freaking using it. And it's like literally if this would go away, we would stop making money. So maybe we should give some money back. Because open source doesn't mean it doesn't cost anything. It costs you either risk or money. Then another interesting thing happened where I'm not sure what I think of this. This is a tricky one. So, yeah, we all know that Internet Explorer wasn't the best browser in the world, and they used their own rendering engine, and they moved that over to the new browser Edge. It's called Edge HTML. While Chrome used to use WebKit and has eventually forked off to have their own rendering engine based on WebKit, which is now called Blink. And then we have Gecko, which is the rendering engine in Firefox. And then we have Server, which is the experimental browser rendering engine from Mozilla. It's not in any other browser. So basically, rendering engines are the bits and pieces that take the text that comes from the server and make it into a website. So all the cool stuff happens in the rendering engine. Now, Edge has decided to not keep developing their own rendering engine. And instead of, I would have expected them to be like, well, we can't keep up with the community, so we open up to the community and make it open source and encourage people to help us maintaining Edge HTML together. Instead, what they did is they went like, okay, we are about to kill Edge HTML, we're just going to use Chromium. The problem that could happen in the future, and this is all hypothetical, I have no idea what's going to happen. Yes, I work at Google, but that doesn't mean that I magically know more than you do, especially about this one. And we can only speculate what this will mean for Microsoft or from Microsoft. So it can be that we lose an independent rendering engine, and that's bad, because I think the diversity of rendering engines is actually a good thing. Even though as a web developer, I keep complaining about the fact that I have to deal with like the different browser bugs, but it means that we have a choice, and the users have a choice, so no single company can go like, we're just going to do it, and you're just going to live with it, really. And I think it's important that we have these 3 different rendering engines, well, 2.5-ish, and that one of the 4th one actually on this one, or the 4.5 or 3.5 one, was Edge HTML. So that going away is actually a bit worrying. But then again, it could mean that it happens the way that it happened with WebKit, that Microsoft eventually goes like, no, we disagree with what you were doing here, so we're going to fork it off. And that's great. That's good, because then we have like an established base that we can work from, and it doesn't mean that no one ever can make their own decisions in how they want to build a browser, right? You can still like split off and make your own thing happen. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see what happens next. Then we have a new website online that I find pretty interesting, and it's going to grow. It's a starting point. The team behind this website worked with people from Mozilla and from Apple, if I remember correctly, and from Microsoft to build what's called web.dev. It's basically a website around what happens in Lighthouse already, but it's browser agnostic. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to give you a starting point to learn about what the well-lit path on the web looks like, what is good on the web. If you're following these practices, you'll be better off than you were before that. So this is a really good one. You can learn about what all these different things mean. Like you have a learn section, you have a measure section that takes you through what Lighthouse does, and then some additional basic stuff. So basically, this allows you to test your sites and learn more about where you can improve and how you can improve it. And I think this is a fantastic way of having like a central place that is not just a reference, but also actually guidance and gives you some feedback loop that you can work with. So this is not replacing Mozilla Developer Network, it is complementing it, and I think that's great. So in summary, I believe that it is pretty much a great time to be a web developer, because today it's easier than ever to make something on the web. You can literally, you don't have to have like a credit card or storage or servers or whatever. You can basically just go to github.com, upload some HTML, and enable GitHub pages. Or if you don't like GitHub, then you use like Sites or now.sh or whatever. There's so many different ways of getting something online. If you want to tinker, there's CodePen, there's JSBin, there's JSFiddle, there is glitch.com. So there, again, StackBlitz, whatnot. So there's so many ways of quickly trying something out on the web than ever before, and I think that's a great thing. Yet there's so much that you can learn, but not everything you have to learn. A lot of it is also happening in the framework ecosystem. There's now an open source fund for framework development, so that's pretty good as well. So someone decided like, hey, we need to do this and give money to people sometimes. So I think it's a great time to get started or even to continue, and I think the web platform is on a great path. However, that also means that it's time to look back at what we didn't do so well, and I think it's important that we take responsibility for what we're building. And that means a lot of different things. It means that we should look into making things fast for the user, not for us, not easy for us, easy and fast for the users. It means making sure that the data that we are collecting from our users is the minimum amount of data that we should be having. And it also means that we should be looking into keeping this data safe and not necessarily like misleading our users to do something that they later regret, right? And it means to be accountable. It means to mean like if we screw up, we should be open about it. And I'd like more people to stand here and say, we did this and it was wrong, because that's the best way for others to not make that mistake, right? So I'd like you to think about something while we're not having a meetup, which is, what will you do next year to create a better web, to make the web better? I know what I will do. I will create more beginner resources. I'll try to convince the people running web.dev or maybe on a different platform to find out how we can create a resource to bring people into the right kind of technologies and into the right kind of mindset to build better web apps. I will also work more on making sure that people are successful when they're building stuff on the web and discoverable in search. That's literally my job. So yeah, I'll try my best to make the web more human and to make sure that we are serving the people we are not serving well right now. And you should figure out what you want to do to make it better. And now, thank you very much. Have snacks, have conversations, talk to us, and enjoy the rest of the evening.